Hey, you guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the rights and responsibilities of counselors. This is the next chapter in our book. And it kind of feels like there's just a whole bunch of, not really random, it's not random what it is, but like there's so many different things that we've been talking about in class that are, remember the words we're using, what's within our job or what's within the scope of what we're supposed to be doing, which is our responsibilities, um, and what is outside of that. And we're going to try and narrow that down a little bit, but it's going to feel a little bit to me anyway when I'm looking through this. It's like throwing spaghetti at the wall. It's a whole bunch of things that we have to be accountable for. And when I was reviewing the slides just a second ago, it feels like a little bit like an overwhelming list of like, I have to consider all these different important things as we go through. And while that's true, some of them are in context of the kind of work we're doing. So I'll try and touch on that as we go. But more than anything, I'm just going to give you all this information. And then when we get to class, we'll talk about it and decide like what's relevant to you, given your site and your clients and those circumstances that you're in. And what things can you put aside and say, I don't really need to worry about that. The other thing to rest assured with is that a lot of this stuff, once it feels like a lot at first, but once you sort of build it into the process of how you work with your own like documentation, diagnostic process, the way you work with clients, a lot of it just gets kind of baked in and it becomes really normal and efficient the way you do it, but it feels like a lot at first. So if you're starting to get overwhelmed, just resist the urge to like respond to that, like to be reactive to it. Just hear it, take it in, and just trust. I know you guys hate hearing this, but we say it all the time because it's important. If you trust the process, that eventually you'll get to a place of comfort where you'll look back and you'll say, oh, yeah, that's how that fits. And this is how it works. And now I don't worry about it anymore. You'll get there. It just takes time going through it. And we've accounted for those things and tried to build the process to help you pick up little bits of that at a time. So you're doing classes now, getting information. You'll get to practicum. You'll get to put it into practice for the first time. You'll get on site and see another way of doing things in your internship, and then put it more into practice. And by the time you get through the program and through supervised practice under someone else's license, and you get to that independent licensure, you'll look back and you'll say, "I'm ready. I now know how these things work, and I've tried them, and it makes sense." Okay, so I'm going to leave that little caveat at the beginning here. So, man, this is too big. Can I squish this up? I'm going to squish it up just a little bit. Hopefully you guys don't miss too much as we go here. But so let's start throwing the spaghetti at the wall here. Talk about first of all, this word fiduciary. What the heck does that even mean? The word fiduciary is kind of a fancy legal term, which just means that you have a responsibility for the welfare of the people that are underneath you. I guess it's not really a good way to say that, but that when we have a client and we're responsible for them, we have to act in the best interest of our client. Another way to think about this term is like if I'm let's see, if I get to work on different boards. Like if you're on a board of advisors or board of trustees or board of directors, something like that, you have to look out for the best interests of the customers or clients of the agency that you're working or you're on that board for. So it's one thing to say, what would really be good for me here is if this company would make a decision so my stocks would go up or something like that. But we don't get to act that way when we have a fiduciary responsibility. The way that works with clients is that we're here to work in their best interests, not ours. That's all that means. Okay. The client accepts that trust within us, as it says above here. And there's more on page 79 about this too. You can look into it, but that's essentially what that means. So if you see that word, that means we act in the best interest of our clients. Now, as we've talked about in class, that can look a little bit different depending on what kind of work you're doing, because there are tertiary benefits that we get from the relationship that we have with clients. We get job satisfaction, we get payment, we get all that kind of stuff. But that can't be our primary motivator, because if it is, we can't offer the service in a beneficial way, or the same beneficial way. So that's worth some discussion if you want to pick that apart, but that's what that means. We have talked in class. I'm going to get out of the way so you can pause and read the screen here too, in case I'm in the way. But we have talked in class about meeting our own needs well, we haven't specifically talked about that, but we will talk about that a little bit more in class. We have talked about what is going on inside of us. In other words, like, how am I showing up well? What's my self-care like? That kind of thing. We must be aware of our own needs, and it's okay to have some of them. I'm going to come back and join you here again too. It's okay to have your own needs, but it's not okay to make those the priority. That's the whole point. This can be really tricky because you might be like, well, I thought we were supposed to take care of ourselves first, like put on my oxygen mask before I put on somebody else's. Isn't self-care our main priority? And that's why this gets a little bit confusing to explain and to talk about, because yes, you can't be effective and efficient if you're not in a healthy place where you have the life-giving capacity to give other people your time and attention. At the same time, you are doing that self-care for the benefit of the client. Like, if you're not in a good place, you can't give them help. So you have to make sure that is the priority so that you can prioritize them. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, but it's really hard to explain and talk about. And that self-care example usually makes sense, but sometimes there's other examples that are much more difficult to explain, of like, um, which is where the gray area of ethics comes. But it's difficult to explain what the priority is and who comes first. The place my head is going right now is there's all kinds of philosophical examples of, like, if I give somebody money on the street, it looks like this altruistic gesture of, like, I just want them to have the resources and I have enough, so I'm giving to them. And then other philosophers, like if you ever read like The Fountainhead with Ayn Rand or something like that, there's this philosophy that, like, well, you're really not doing it for them, you're doing it for your own need to feel good about your generosity or something. And we can get into the weeds about that stuff. Really, I want to try to avoid getting in the weeds as much as we can. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but it's worth thinking. What's going on inside? Am I doing it for them? Am I doing it for me? Is this promoting the health of the client? And as we look at our code of ethics and the values and all that stuff that are portrayed in there, what we're trying to understand is it doing right by the client? Do I have a professional obligation, fiduciary relationship, to prioritize them and their well-being here? And as long as I'm in a place to do that, then we're good. So, um, so these other questions of what am I getting out of this? What do I want out of this? What are my motivations? These are all questions that we can dig into. The one thing I will say, I'm actually going to go away for just one more second here. In the fine print here, the desire of power. One of those things you'll meet very few people who, at least in the counseling space, who will openly admit that they want power or fame or recognition, and that yet you see a lot of people that act in that kind of way. So I'll tell you one story from me really quickly. When I was in my doc program, I was I was motivated to understand other kinds of opportunities within the counseling world. In other words, I knew that there were these jobs I could do working for state vocational rehab. That was like where a lot of people went. And then there was this other stuff where people worked in law and policy, and they went on to doctoral programs, did all this stuff that seemed big and powerful and fancy. And it was a whole different world than I had come from. And I was kind of attracted not only by the difference of things that I didn't know and want to learn, like that was part of it, but there was also something about, there's something in me that says, like, I want to be, I want to be relevant. I want people to take me seriously. I want to be acknowledged and appreciated by other people. And those are kind of like core fundamental parts of us that I think are probably fine to have. Like, it's okay to want some affirmation sometimes. It's okay to be respected. It's okay to have people who appreciate you and that kind of stuff. And when we don't have that in a way that fills up the heart, sometimes we can go get it in other areas, and it can become this really important, healthy thing that turns toxic. And it looks like it just fills up your ego, and you want power and respect and authority because it kind of feeds your need to be important and relevant. Just like, the kid who wants his dad's attention or appreciation and he can't get it. So then he, you know, is hungry for attention. So he goes and tries to look for it in the wrong places. That kind of compensation conversation. These are those things, the desire for power, the desire to be a savior, to be a helper, I feel helpless in my own relationships, so I want to help other people because otherwise I don't feel grounded if I don't, provide to others, even though I feel unprovided for in my life. These kind of things are really, really hard to talk about. They're really, really important to understand in terms of your own motivation. So I know there are times when I have a desire for power. It doesn't feel good. It's really embarrassing. It's something that I think we should probably have conversations about. Maybe not in class, maybe not openly in front of everybody, but at least at the very least have them with a good therapist, your advisor, or somebody you trust. um, because when it comes down to it, you can justify and explain all around these kind of things. It's like, well, it wasn't really that I was desiring power so much as that I wanted to help the client, by using my advocating the power that I was given as a graduate of a master's program, so that I could help the client, but I was really looking for a little bit of recognition on the side. Like just there's all kinds of complicated things going on, and that's where we can get lost in them. We can get in trouble there, and the more you are willing to go to those places and shine a light on them, the better off you'll be later on. I promise you. I've seen it happen. Other people have experienced it myself. And the more you're willing to explore those areas and be honest about where you are with that kind of stuff, the more you can then do something about it so that it doesn't show up in unhealthy ways. And there's more to talk about there too, but I'll just leave that for now. The reason that we're talking about that here is that it is one of your responsibilities to do that. Whether you do that or not, it's really hard. I'll tell you, as a professor, it's really, really hard to require that. It's really, really hard to do it within the bounds of what professors can do. It's possible, but it takes a bunch of willingness on your parts to engage in that kind of thing. It's hard to know when and how, too. So, as a counselor, it's your job to provide that environment for your clients. As a professor, I think there's a unique role within the counseling educator space that we can kind of try to explore some of that without getting too deep into it in a way that's inappropriate, because we're not therapists, we're professors, right? Even though we're counseling or whatever. Gets really complicated, but just know that it is your responsibility to go in and shine some light on those dark, embarrassing, and vulnerable places, to take a look at those. And just I'll just leave you with this. This will be the last comment on it. One of the best things you can do is not be defensive, like I'm not interested in power. I don't want to be a helper just for the sake of my own benefit, but just to ask the question: am I doing this for my own need for recognition, affirmation, for power, for authority, for respect, for I need to help others because I feel helpless myself, like that kind of stuff. Am I showing love in a way that I'm not receiving? Ask those questions, get curious about it, even if you're not really sure. That's a great way to start. So, okay. Um, what am I doing? Moving on. That's what I'm doing. Okay. Most of these titles are going to be the same. We're going to be looking at lots of different kinds of responsibilities that we have. Okay. Here's another one. We must avoid client dependency. In other words, it's great that clients come back week after week, and this can look a lot of different ways. If you were a great, great, great counselor and you're so good that people are like, I just love being around so and so, and it's so fun and it's so exciting and enjoyable, that is an intoxicating experience for us. When people appreciate you and value you, it's really nice it feels really good, because we're like, oh man, I am something special, huh? People just want to keep coming back and coming back. And yet, isn't the point of counseling to help people be more independent and empowered to live healthier lives in their own way, to have their own capacity, to do that, to provide help and support to others too? That's part of just growing up. Sometimes we can get overly attached to our clients, not by wanting to see them, but by getting really comfortable and used to the idea that they want to see us. They come back year after year after year, and they're just either not getting better, in which case maybe this isn't working for them, or they're just coming back over and over again because they like us, they think they need us. And our job is to kind of set some boundaries with them, to say, you don't need me, you need to be okay for yourself. That kind of stuff, right? So we're trying to balance this, like, ongoing support while encouraging independent and risk taking. By risk taking, I'm not going to talk about that one too much, but it takes risk to be vulnerable, and that's what we're trying to say. Like, let's challenge that sense of insecurity. Let's challenge that sense that you're not good enough. That kind of stuff. It's scary. It's risky. That's the risk taking I'm talking about here. So, a little bit of a culture check here too. Freedom and independence may not be the goal for everyone. So, even though I say like people want to be independent, they want to be free, remember that there are plenty of cultures, and by cultures I mean nationalities, but also just like the culture of individual families where loyalty, community, and a sense of codependence is really baked into how they function. In other words, it's not always necessarily wrong to just say like, well, let me say that again. If our goal as a therapist is to get people independent and off therapy, it's a very American value. It's the way the insurance incentivizes us to do our work, because you'll pay for dysfunction and pathology, but you can't pay for if somebody is just there to sort of build in a sense of belongingness. So there is an ethical question here. On one hand, it looks like we want to avoid dependency. And on the other hand, it looks like we want to reward belonging um, as a core principle. So there is an ethical argument to be made here for both of those things. And what we get to do is look at which one is it. As we've talked about already, it could be both. It could be either or. The question is, if we're thinking it's more of dependency, then we have an obligation to set some boundaries with our clients. If we're here to mutually appreciate each other, the question is that something that is worth a financial relationship? In other words, am I spending time around this person because they are getting a sense of belonging, but they're also paying me? So where's the real benefit here? We got to ask those kind of questions. A little bit different when there's a mandated client. They're involuntary clients, right? So what are we expecting from mandated clients? If there is a client, I'm going to remind you to hit pause. Every time I just make myself go away, just know that you can hit pause, read it, and then come back. Maybe you just like print out the thing from Canvas, the slides, whatever. But this is for anybody who's just not doing that. So what can we expect from clients? Can we expect change from clients if they're coming in at somebody else's request or requirement? It's a different kind of work, essentially. I don't want to go too deep into this either, but the theory behind motivational interviewing is that some clients are required to show up. I'm thinking this is for you, Claire. All those kids who are like, go to the school counselor's office and deal with this because you're being a naughty boy or whatever right now. And they show up and they're just like, they don't want to listen to you. You're an authority. You're an adult. They don't think you can understand them. They don't want anything to do with you. And your job is to do something with them, right? What that something is another conversation. Or they're mandated from the courts to show up for therapy because they got their third DUI and something like that. There's all kinds of situations in which you might have mandated clients. Another example that's not anything related to those two is you'll have a kid whose mom brought him there and says, you need counseling. And the kid's like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm not against it. I just don't get it. I don't understand it. And it feels kind of like a similar mandate of why somebody's there. So the question is for motivational interviewing is how do you build motivation to move towards the change process, to want to do something, to engage in it even, if you don't have their voluntary participation, which is very different than somebody who came in on their own looking for support, right? So are we expecting participation? Are we expecting change? Are we expecting engagement in the process? Merely attendance? Are they working towards progress, toward a goal? That is the question that you get to ask. And the question of, how much do people need to engage in the process before we terminate them? That is a really hard ethical question because we have an obligation to keep working towards their benefit. And yet, if you want to look through the code, there is a little part in there about termination, that it's also inappropriate to hang on to clients for too long for this kind of dependency issue if they're not making progress. When you terminate, is really a case by case basis, and it's hard to say exactly what that spot is. But you'll feel it out when you have some experiences. And the more times we talk about case by case scenarios, the more you'll say you need to lean into people and trust them almost without fail. Kind of one of the terms that I like to use. I told you guys in class the day about somebody named Father Greg Boyle. Tattoos on the Heart, Barking to the Choir. Those are the two books that I think are great. He uses this term called radical kinship, radical kinship, which means lean into this idea that we are brothers and sisters on the same earth, and we're all people, we're all breathing the same air, and we're all sharing a common goal. He has a Catholic Christian sense of it, but even if we don't have that religious or spiritual sense, there is something shared about our experiences here. And radical kinship means we lean into the relationship and the part of us that says we are together in this almost eternally. And then we give you this code of ethics and have these lectures about, well, then there's times to give up, though. And there's times to set boundaries and times to terminate and times to say it's not appropriate for us to continue this relationship. And that's the hard part about this is therapeutically, we have to lean into that kind of concept. And then professionally, there are also these other parts to this work that say, but maybe not, right? And when you do that is really the hard place here, when to know how to do that. So again, I'm not giving you a whole ton of answers right now. The answers will come when you get into situations that you can then apply these things. I'm just opening the understanding to say it could be either of those things. Okay. So if you're feeling uncomfortable, like Aaron, just give us an answer. Tell me when it's appropriate, when it's not. I'm not going to do that yet. So I'm holding off a little bit. One last thing I'll say that's kind of behind my head here is there is a difference between your role as an evaluator and your role as a therapeutic role. And I just kind of gave you this, like, there's this radical kinship idea. And as a therapist, you have to lean into that versus this professional roles. Well, that evaluative role, it's not necessarily just a professional role. It's more of like as a therapist, you say unconditional positive regard, right? Just like Rogers, radical kinship, just like that a guy, whatever his name is, Father Boyle. And then as an evaluator, you say, well, I'm not really leaning into the relationship. I'm just here to be an objective, scientific, third-party observer to watch behavior, to hear about someone's cognitions based on the way they talk. And that requires consent. And then what's behind my head here is they need to know your expectations, but you should understand what they want as well. Okay, so it's our responsibility to say, here's what I'm getting out of this. I need to observe. I need information. I have a job to do. And there still is a role for what do you want to get out of this? Because if somebody says, I'm not talking to you, you shrinks are all the same. I'm not giving you a dang thing, even though I know I'm going to go to jail for it or whatever. We get to say, okay, I can respect that. And if you don't want to do this, it's your life, your choices, your consequences as well. Just know that I'm here to do this kind of job. And you lay that out for them so they can consent to it in an informed kind of way. That's the idea. Okay, let's do some more counselor responsibilities. We are responsible to understand techniques. So you're here in school to learn about some of these. We want to be competent, proficient, and skilled in the techniques, right? When you went through the principles class, you learned about summaries and reflections, or some of you are doing this right now. How to peel back the layers of the onion and understand a person in a deeper sense. Sometimes you want to understand the surface level details of what job they do and how many kids they have, and this sort of intake demographic data almost. And then we want to be able to peel back those layers and know a little bit more about their deeper motivations and deeper feelings. We want to get skilled in the ability to do those kind of things. Also, some of you who have been in my principles class know that I put a high value on the ability to give people emotional space. So skills and techniques like allowing the emotional energy of the room to increase at times when they're like, they need to feel something to really fully embrace the experience of it instead of trying to push it away or repress it down or whatever that might be. To deflect is another thing that people do. So those are the techniques. Those are the things we want to get good at, and we have a responsibility to learn those, right? I think that was pretty obvious, probably. Um, there are unusual and experimental techniques that we want to be cautious with. And there's always people who say, like, well, what about psychedelic assisted therapy? What about hypnosis? What about experimenting with the methods of providing therapy? Like, if therapy is not just like a 45-minute, 50-minute session in a room, it could also be an experience out in nature. It could be, a group experience. It could be with just couples, it could be with the whole, the wild orgy parties, because that's what you need to do get better. Like whatever it is, there's all these kind of different experimental ways people have tried to say, how do people live their best life or get the most out of an experience and be healthy or whatever it is, how they justify it. There is a sense of, uh, there is a real and important sense that we need to take risks with ourselves to explore those parts of us that are scary, with clients to help them challenge the way they're thinking or feeling or understanding. There is a real sense of risk that's important in the process. And there's a sense of risk that is unnecessary and is too much. You know what I mean? Um, so when you're thinking about unusual experimental techniques, what we're trying to do in our ethical decision making process is assess how much risk is there present in the situation that we're in, and how much we're willing to tolerate, and who's really the liability here. If we're willing to take risks to our own license or well-being or professional career or whatever, that's a that's a choice that we're making for ourselves. But if we're putting our clients at risk, or other practitioners or the profession, those are a different conversation to have. Okay. So another one is any treatment should have a reasonable expectation of success. That's pretty important too. There's not much more I want to say about that one, but just doing the latest fad technique just because everybody else is doing it doesn't necessarily mean you should be doing it. If it doesn't have good outcomes, we don't know if it has good outcomes. Kind of part of that risk taking thing is like, you shouldn't do things that have potential for harm, but you should also avoid things that don't really look like they're going to make a difference. You know what I mean? So I'll just leave that one there as it is. Um, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this conversation about active and passive roles. Um, I think we've talked about it a little bit in class, and it'll certainly come up because it seems to come up from week to week, or at least once a semester for sure. But the idea of like, what's the right way to do counseling? Sometimes people need they want answers. They want to know how they can build some regulatory techniques into their life to calm their emotions, or they want to figure out, like, what do I do in this interpersonal situation with my boss or my spouse, whatever. Sometimes people need those solutions. Other times they just want to be heard, validated, understood. They want a sense of belonging, and it doesn't require you to do anything to tell them how to live their life, right? So solutions or comfort. Do we take an active role with our clients, or do we take a passive role? It really depends on who the client is and what the situation is, and also what we have the capacity for, right? In class, we've mentioned before, some of you who are typically more passive and you love people pleasing and you want to sit back and just be the most beautiful listener in the world, that's great. And you're going to miss those opportunities to really be active. Those of you who like to get really involved and like to talk and like to explain things, and like I'm a more active person. If I'm not seeing those times when I just need to shut my mouth and feel something with people, I'm going to miss opportunities to comfort. And so it's our responsibility to do it right, whatever that means. And so we need to have both of those capacities within us. Um, the last part here, again, I'll get out of the way. If you choose a theoretical orientation, recognize that it may not be a good fit for all people. You have a choice: either learn more or be clear about what you can and cannot provide. I kind of mentioned that just a little bit ago. You need to provide services, but the question about what is your theoretical orientation, it's kind of your job to figure that out, right? I'll give you two anecdotes here that might help with this, but the rest of it you'll get in theories class. And the first one is relevant to that, what you get in theories class. I have a student internship right now who went out to her site, and she's with a bunch of other students from different programs, different places in the state. And she said, I was really surprised as hearing them talk about their theoretical orientation because they didn't seem to understand it or be as prepared. And I felt like we've been so prepared at this program that I didn't have anything to say to their situation because I felt like I was just ready and I understood what I was doing and how to justify and explain it. Which it's not just like, patting ourselves on the back, which it kind of is because I think we can be proud of that. But it's also to say, um, you get you're not here just to pick one and model yourself after Sigmund Freud or Albert Ellis or Fritz Perls or whatever all those old dead guys, but or Aaron Murtis. It's not that you have to just do it like I do. It's that you get to take bits and pieces and you have to make them your own. So you choose things sometimes consciously, sometimes by observation and social learning. But you have to do it. You have to get to a place where you are working a certain way in order to provide something of intention, right? Not just by accident, but you intentionally know what you're doing to help people. The second anecdote that I'll give you is one that I borrow from Gina, who she says this to classes. You can ask her about it; she might say it to you. But I love this story. I think it's so relevant. When she was in her internship, she used to work for this guy who was like this tall, funny, just I don't even know what word she would use to describe, but he was tall and he was funny and he worked with kids, and so he'd be this tall guy getting down on the floor, giggling and laughing and doing whatever he does with the kids, and just like he had that kid energy, the kids respond to, and she just doesn't have that. And so she went in and she was like, "Oh, that's how he does it. Oh, that's great. I want to try and be like him." And so she did it and tried to make a joke, and she just doesn't have that that charisma that works in that funny kind of way. And so the kids were just looking at her like that was awkward and weird, which was to me it's so funny. Um, but the point is that she had to figure out how to do that work, and she could do it in a different style, but she had a good theory, and so she understands the theory, what she's doing, and has an explanation for it. And it just you have to make it work in your own way. Okay, so it's one thing to choose just this one way of doing it. It's another thing to really embody the purpose and the passion that you're trying to project to somebody. That confidence in yourself and in what you're doing is helpful. It's also good to be humble about it, but having some confidence about what you can do and what you can't do and how it works is really going to be helpful as you move forward. Not only is it helpful, but like you just need to have that part of our responsibility. Okay, interruptions and terminations. Okay, this is where we get into a little bit more of the I don't know, nitty gritty is the right word, but the nuance is maybe a better word for this. We've already talked about termination, but let's dig into it just a little bit more. You can terminate services for some reasons. Okay, here's a list of them. If somebody doesn't pay you, you can terminate. You don't have to keep seeing a person pro bono. Now, what I hear from a lot of people, especially private practitioners, who accept the payment personally from their clients, they oftentimes they start a practice with their big hearts and they say, "Oh, you missed it, and oh, you missed a paycheck because your kids were sick, and you have a really good reason, and oh, okay, well, we'll just keep going with this, but you still owe me." And then people will get behind and they'll get themselves in these really sticky situations. So then they say, "Well, I need to have a policy for this. After two missed payments, I can't schedule any more appointments, or I can't see you for the next time you come in, or whatever that is." And if you have your own private practice, you get to make that up. If you work for an agency, oftentimes they have their own billing department that will do this kind of stuff for you, or somebody at a front desk, which is really convenient because then you don't have to set boundaries for yourself because somebody set them for you, which is a whole other conversation. But uh, if somebody doesn't pay for counseling, you don't have to provide them counseling. You may choose to, but my experience is that the more you choose to do that, the weirder it gets, and then the more you'll want to set boundaries so that you can have a good explanation for when you don't accept uh, new clients if they don't pay. If you have to go on medical leave, you're allowed to be sick, and you can terminate or at least temporarily postpone or suspend treatment if you have to go on medical leave. Probably a good idea. If not, an ethically required idea to provide referrals for clients. So it's best practice, if not like necessary, to say, I'm out, I'm sorry, but I need some help finding you another counselor for the time being. They don't have to take you up on it, but you should provide it for them. Even if it's just a name or, a friend who can sort of open up their schedule for you. That's really ideal if you can do that kind of thing. Um, if people complete their treatment, you can terminate and say, yep, you've done a very good job. I'm not going to schedule any more appointments. But Aaron, I still want to come in. I don't think I can do this alone. Oh, you're so close, though. You're so good at this, and you can do it. How about take a week and just think about it? I'm not going to schedule anything because we need to be done with this. But, you get the idea. They complete the treatment. If there's more harm caused by attending, there's probably going to be some questions there about what might that even be, and I'm going to skip over them for the sake of time right now. But if coming is causing more harm, then it's okay for you to say, I need this to be done for now, or we cannot continue this. The question, a good conversation that we might have is this harm to client or harm to counselor? It could be either, really. There are circumstances in which clients are harmed more by continuing. And if you're in danger or there's a threat to you, you can also terminate or, not accept a client. One thing I will say, it's kind of a nuanced one that I'll say here, is harm to clients can sometimes be also just if a client is not making progress and it's you're sort of enabling whatever condition that they're coming to see you for. This can be really tricky when it comes to like personality disorders of like, I need you. I need you to be my person. You're the only person who understands me. And sometimes that can come from a traumatic situation in the past. And if you're allowing that to continue excessively, it's not helping them make any progress. And it actually might just be like, one could argue that it causes more harm to continue the dysfunctional patterns in their life than actually helping them. So what oftentimes happens in those kind of situations is you're like, I need to provide support and balance boundaries so that I can give clients the right kind of distance that's appropriate so they're not needing too much from us, but also not pushing them away. And it's massively confusing for clients who've lived through those traumatic situations emotionally in their lives. But that's why trauma work can take so much practice at getting like, what is that balance and how am I getting it right? That's the idea. So that's just one example. I think I've already kind of said this, but it must be done with the best interest of the client in mind, referrals and support. So if you're doing terminations or having to interrupt services, maternity leave is another common one here. But if you're doing that, make referrals to other counselors. At the very least, you're giving people names and phone numbers and contact information. What's more ideal is you help them make those appointments, or at least talk to a counselor that can reach out to those clients. That kind of situation. The more you do that kind of stuff, the better off you'll be. And then a good practice is develop an emergency plan. So when if you're not available, you can say, if something were to happen to me and I just can't make it into the office, here's what my clients should do, and just put that into your informed consent document or your professional disclosure document. We'll talk about what those are here. We're not quite there in the class, but we'll talk about that too. So this one you might want to put a pin in it, make a note of it for later on when we come back to that. Okay, avoid abandonment. The last slide we said it's okay to terminate under these circumstances, and the risk here is abandoning clients. And abandonment is a big deal because hopefully that word triggers some recognition in you that you've heard that before. Here's the hard thing is, imagine that situation that I just talked about where there's a client, maybe there's some personality disorders that come from past trauma where they have this attachment style that's sort of disorganized, and they're like, I need you, but I hate you, and I love you, and I need this, and it's just like emotions all over the board, right? Sometimes those people can get into crisis situations, right? You've probably either lived through some or had some experiences, or you will eventually, where there's somebody who's like, if you're going to set this boundary with me and you're going to tell me that I can't be around you because I'm not healthy, well, then there's no point for me to live and I'll just go kill myself, right? Not an ideal situation, but really not that uncommon, because when people have that sense of, I'm not loved, I'm not cared for, I don't belong here, they can go to those places. That's part of how this works, right? That's how the human psyche works, the brain, or whatever you want to say. The question is, if I have to say, look, it's not healthy for me to enable this dependence on me. I'm going to set some boundaries with you. And if you can't respect those boundaries and you're going to go overboard, I have policies that I need to put in place to keep myself safe and healthy. And that means that I may need to terminate with you. And then they come back with like an escalated sense of like, well, I'm in crisis then because you can't put up these boundaries. And it just kind of builds. The question in situations like that and many others is, can I continue setting up more and more boundaries if clients push against those more and more? In other words, can I terminate if a client keeps escalating and getting more and more desperate in those situations? The general consensus is no. And this is where it gets ethically sticky, right? Is you can't abandon clients in their times of the highest need. And there's a responsibility that we have to set boundaries to keep ourselves healthy, right? So this is where there's some discussion. Um, there's I don't even know. Well, maybe we'll do a case study in class to talk about these, because it's really, really hard and challenging. And it almost requires that you live through some of these situations so that you can see the detailed nuances, because no case study that we're going to make up in class is going to be quite as good as just living through the experience. So I'll leave it there. I will give this one example that's up here. If a person can't pay but is still suicidal, remember we said if someone can't pay for your services, but if they have, let's just say, major depressive disorder or bipolar 2, and they have high risk for suicide, is there a responsibility that we have to provide treatment even if they're not paying for it? This is one of those situations where you may feel or may have to see that person to avoid that crisis situation, right? And that's a judgment call. It's a judgment call that only you can make. That's why it's so hard, because you might have that person, you're like, oh, I'm so done with you. And you're now escalating all this stuff. And now you're going to say you're suicidal just because I don't want to see you. And I know you're faking it. You're just saying it because you're emotional, whatever, right? But if you know in your heart of hearts that this is a risk, that this person is in a very vulnerable and sticky situation, but you're also battling with your own frustration about how they're handling it and all your own needs, this is when it is really, really important to have trusted, good, healthy people in your life that can help be objective when you're struggling to remain so. So I'll leave that there. But just know that this issue of abandonment is a big one, and you'll get in these situations. I promise you, 100% promise you, you'll get into those situations at some point. Okay, here's a list on page 88. There's a bunch of stuff here. Let's see. I'm gonna scan through this to see which ones I want to talk about, because I want to talk about all of them. Honestly, the first one here. Honestly discuss with the client your intention to terminate and the specific reasons for your decisions. Oh, by the way, this list are suggestions for things to do to help kind of alleviate some of the challenges that come along with the situations that we've been talking about. Okay, so having open, honest discussions about what your intentions are can really go a long way to not getting into these situations, or if you're in them and you can't help it, to just handling it in a professionally and ethically responsibly way. Okay, so have the conversation even when it's hard. Know your decisions and explain them, even if people disagree with them. That's okay. They can disagree, but as long as you're explaining them clearly. And this is my line. Like, I don't like that line, I'm going to cross it. Okay, but you have to understand, here's the consequence if you cross it. That kind of thing. Give the client an opportunity to make changes that would be necessary to continue the relationship. So you can say, here's my line, and they cross it, and you're like, well, okay, you can get back. If you get back, I'll continue to be okay with this. But if you keep coming at me, that's going to be a problem. So give them opportunities, right? Written notice, offer the client 1 to 3 termination sessions. So you don't want to just quit cold turkey. And, if an ideal termination situation is, okay, I think you're getting ready there. Let's make 2 more appointments, and then we won't make any more after that. And we'll see how we are. We can always reevaluate, but let's talk about quitting. Let's talk about being done and see how close we are. Having some foresight in that, really helpful. Um, good referrals is another one here. Give your client up to 3 good referrals. Emergency contact stuff. That one's important, and usually it should be kind of standard for that to be included in informed consent stuff. People forget about what they signed on their informed consent document. So bringing that out and say, hey, remember this thing? There's some phone numbers here and some other agencies you might want to check out, that kind of stuff. But so it'll be around when you need it. I think I'll let you read these. This is really small. If you can't see it on the screen, I'll let you read them in your slides on Canvas. So we'll just keep going. Let's see how much more we have actually. Yeah, 15 minutes. Oh yeah, we're doing okay for once. I always run out of time. I'm always really proud of myself when I get kind of excited when I'm actually on time and I'm doing something right. Okay, we've mentioned informed consent in past classes. We've talked about the assignment that we have coming up, and we'll get more into this. But remember when we were talking about it a couple weeks ago, and we said the most important thing is this issue of confidentiality, but informed consent is also things like your payment policy and late payment policy and termination policies and emergency phone numbers and like risks and benefits and that kind of stuff. But really, most people think about informed consent as, is it just this HIPAA stuff, this confidentiality business? The answer is no, and I think we've covered it enough, so I'm not going to go too far into it. But it's not just about confidentiality. Those are just the most big legal pressing situations that people can get in, and they often cause the most fear in counselors and the most confusion in clients. So that's why those are there. It also gives clients an increased sense of ownership over the process. In other words, if clients know what this is about and know how to engage in it, then they can do the engaging. So you're not having to do all the work guiding. So the more work you can learn to do upfront to say, here's what I'm going to ask of you in this process. I want you to come in being as ready as you possibly can to just do whatever work that we decide is going to be best for you, right? If you're waiting for me to provide you answers, I'm not that smart and I'm not going to have enough for you to do that's going to be meaningful to you. But if you really engage in the process, you'll get a lot out of this. That kind of conversation up front helps people take ownership over their part of the process too. So be thinking about that as you're navigating setting expectations with clients. Understanding of the boundaries of the relationship. I think we've kind of covered that one. What it is, what it's not, what's okay and what's not. I'll skip through that one for now. Get it in writing. This is, I don't know if we've talked about this in this class or not, but sometimes you'll hear people say things like, well, if it wasn't written down, it didn't happen. So there are certain things that you want to write down to make sure you document, especially if you're having really difficult situations, ones that you're worried that you might have to bring this up with a supervisor or it might go to court or something like that. Some of you are in situations where the documentation is emphasized a lot more because of legal issues, right? You'll also hear people say, well, maybe that one make that one a phone call. You're going to have this sensitive conversation. You don't want to put it in writing because you don't want to be held accountable to it later. I have my own, maybe it's moral, maybe it's ethical feelings about that, because if you're trying to do something or say something that you don't want to be held accountable to, I wonder whether you should be saying it at all or whether you're doing something to be protective of self instead of being open and honest with what your intentions are. That's just my personal opinion. I get why people say, put this in writing or it didn't happen, or, don't write it down because you don't want anybody to use it against you. Those threats exist. And so there's reasons for both of those things. But it's worth a conversation. But just know what you write down is really important, whether in both of those ways. I'll just say that. A written disclosure statement. I don't even know what to say with that. There's when we get to the assignment, this will make more sense. You can kind of ignore it for now, I guess. But Appendix B, there is an example in your textbooks. If you want to flip to it and look at that now, you're welcome to do that. It also includes apparently nothing else. Apparently that's all it is. Kidding. I don't know what that means. I probably was having a thought when I was writing the slide a couple of years ago, and then I forgot what it was, and so I don't know. Um, a little bit more about informed consent, I guess. Um, oh, I think I know what happens. Sometimes what I do is I'll be working on the idea of informed consent, and then I'll write a bunch of stuff, and I'll be like, oh crap, I ran out of room. I'll put this on a different slide, and then I forget to delete this last one. So actually, this is just a continuation of the one that was just there. So again, Appendix B. You don't need to. How much do I want to say about this? I'll gloss over this for now, and then when we get to the assignment, in fact, it's probably on this same week. We'll talk about this more in class. But if you look at different informed consent or disclosure statements from different providers in different places, they're all so different because people provide different services to different clients and their organizations function differently. And if the idea is to inform clients of what this kind of service is going to be like, it goes to show that they're going to be different, right? Like different processes require different explanations. So that's why they all look different, but it can be confusing to us to try and figure out what is actually supposed to be in there and what isn't. It can and should include everything on page 92, and I'm going to not go into that. Actually, I'm kind of curious. I have the book right here. You guys can flip through it and look at it, or we can bring it up in class too. But when you get to your assignment, then you'll want to kind of go through and look. There's a whole bunch of crap here for the sake of curiosity. See all those bullet points? You probably can't read them, but there they are. There's a bunch of stuff, including the purposes, goals, and techniques, procedures, limitations, potential risks, benefits, services, and benefits of services. Counselor qualifications, relevant degrees, licenses, certifications, areas of specialization, expertise, blah, blah, blah. It's a whole bunch of stuff, right? So you'll want to go through and write those down, okay? And like explain what those are to clients. It's also know that this is a document that doesn't have to be perfect your first time, and you don't have, if you're one of those anxious type A types, it's like, I have to have everything right away, otherwise something bad's going to happen. You can try and do your best to calm down a little bit and say, I don't have to have everything, and this is practice. So once you get into a real situation, you'll learn about why and how to justify what you have in there and be really intentional about it. You just can't do that now because we're not sure exactly what we're planning for. So it should include everything, and if you don't get it right while we're in school here, that's okay. You'll learn this stuff as you go. And you'll have people who have thought through this and provide you examples when you get your first job and kind of thing. So presented fully in writing, do you have to read the entire informed consent? Some of these documents can be pages and pages and pages long. Do you have to do that? No. But do you just give a speech like I do in class sometimes as example? I'm like, when you're describing confidentiality, you have to say everything is confidential except for risk to harm to self or others, harm to vulnerable adults, children, or in the case of a subpoena, it's not enough, right? Because people want to know about your late policy and all that kind of stuff. But can you tell everybody everything in the first meeting without overwhelming them? Probably not. But do you need to tell them enough so they get comfortable and they know how to use the document and where to go? Probably. Some people will be like, yeah, I've seen a million of those things. I don't need to know right now, but I know where to go to get it. And you're like, great, let's move on. Other people will be like, I don't understand. What does this mean? You might have to spend more time with them. So present it fully in writing. Orally, we highlight the important parts, and what the important parts are depend on what's important to that individual person. You can't just give it to them to substitute for dialogue. You have to talk to them about it. The question is how much, and that's what you get to sort out for yourself. And I think it's inherent in what I've said is communicating is an ongoing process. Some expectations are best left until some trust is built. If you meet a person for the first time and you say, look, I want this to go really well, and I want to be the safest, most trusting person for you, but I need you to know that you can't trust me with certain kinds of information, and it's this, and you list off the confidentiality. And by the way, if you don't show up for your sessions, I'm just going to terminate you, and I'm not going to be able to see you anymore. Oh, by the way, if you get into a suicidal situation, here's the number you need to call. Like, if you start with this stuff, you're probably going to say it differently anyway. But even if you start with this stuff, it's probably not going to do well to build trust with people, right? You know what I mean? So that's the tricky part about this is just trying out, starting, how do I even talk about these things in a way that builds trust? It has to be therapeutic, has to be legally safe and ethically responsible, but also therapeutically beneficial. And those are hard things to reconcile. So that's why you just got to try it out and start fumbling through it until you get it. Oh, great. It's 54 minutes and we're already at the end. Okay. Do I want to read this quote? I think I do. The only people who get upset when you set boundaries are the ones who benefit from you having them, or from you having none. Sorry. So I think that's just a nice sentiment. If you want to talk about what that means, we can do it in class. But thank you for hanging out with me for this hour, and I will see you in class next week. Bye, guys.